The arrival of the human captain. The stars stretched out in every direction, vast and infinite, as Captain Elias piloted his ship, the Aegis, toward the planet Ithar. The darkness of space enveloped the craft, but the distant light from the planet's twin suns illuminated the surrounding nebula, painting the sky with hues of purple and gold. Elias could feel the anticipation simmering through the ship's corridors, a mixture of excitement and nervousness from his crew. They had been preparing for this mission for months, knowing that their arrival would mark the beginning of a new era for humanity and its place among the stars. The Ithar were known across the galaxy for their advanced technology, immense knowledge, and stoic nature. Their history was rich, but their way of life had remained frozen in time, rooted in ancient traditions and practices. They were also known for their unwavering belief in logic and precision, qualities that had earned them respect and reverence throughout the universe. But there was one thing that had piqued the curiosity of Captain Elias and his crew: the Ithar Queen, Elira. Elira, the ruler of Ithar, was said to be a woman of immense beauty and intelligence, yet she was also notorious for her cold, almost unapproachable demeanor. Her species, having evolved to be entirely logical and efficient, had long abandoned any form of emotional expression. Physical pleasure, emotional vulnerability, and the concept of true connection were foreign to them. Everything was viewed through the lens of function, purpose, and practicality. To the Ithar, the human notion of climax, a moment of pure emotional and physical release, was simply a myth. As the Aegis neared Ithar's atmosphere, Elias stood at the helm, gazing out at the planet's majestic landscape. He had heard stories about the Ithar, about their incredible intellect and scientific achievements, but there was something else he couldn't shake: the thought of the Ithar Queen herself. What would she be like? Would she be as unapproachable as the stories said, or was there more to her than met the eye? The ship descended into Ithar's capital, a city built on a massive plateau surrounded by sprawling forests and crystal-clear lakes. The skyline was dominated by enormous towers of glass and metal that seemed to grow organically from the land, their surfaces shimmering like the surface of a frozen lake. As they touched down on the landing pad, Elias felt a sense of awe wash over him. The beauty of this place was unlike anything he had ever seen before, yet there was an eerie stillness in the air, as if the entire city was holding its breath. A welcoming party had gathered on the landing platform to greet the humans. The Ithar Queen, Elira, stood at the forefront, her posture regal and commanding. She was tall and slender, her skin a deep, iridescent teal that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her violet eyes, like twin orbs of liquid light, scanned the group of humans with a cold, calculating gaze. A crown of silver, delicate yet intricately designed, sat upon her head, and her presence exuded a quiet authority that demanded respect. As Elias disembarked from the Aegis, he felt the weight of her gaze upon him. The air seemed to thrum with the silent energy of the encounter. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The crew remained silent, watching the exchange between their captain and the queen. They had been briefed on Ithar customs and etiquette, but this moment felt different. The queen's eyes were piercing, her presence imposing, and Elias knew that the words they exchanged today would determine much about humanity's future in this corner of the galaxy. Captain Elias, Elira's voice rang out, smooth and unwavering. "I am Queen Elira of Ithar. Welcome to our world." Elias stepped forward, his posture straight and respectful, but there was a glint of curiosity in his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head slightly, though not in submission, "it is an honor to finally meet you. I've heard much about your people, your accomplishments, and your strength." The queen tilted her head slightly, as if weighing his words. "And what of your species, Captain? What is it that makes humans worthy of our attention?" Elias met her gaze, his blue eyes steady and unflinching. "We are survivors, Your Majesty. Humans are a young species, but we have been tested in ways no other species has. Our strength comes not from our technology or our physical capabilities, but from our ingenuity, our resilience, and our unyielding determination. Ithara's eyes narrowed slightly, intrigued but not convinced. You speak of strength, but I have heard that your kind thrives on emotion, on feeling. Is that your source of strength? Emotion? How primitive. Elias chuckled softly, sensing the skepticism in her tone. Perhaps, he said, his voice rich with the weight of experience. But I believe that it is through emotion that we find the deepest parts of ourselves. Emotions like love, fear, desire, they drive us. They help us push through challenges that would otherwise break us. The Queen raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the unfamiliar notion. I have heard such things, but I wonder if your species has truly mastered the art of emotion, or if it is simply a weakness you have not yet overcome. Elias shrugged. It's not about overcoming it, Your Majesty. It's about embracing it. Emotions are not something to be feared. They are the very thing that makes us human. Ithara's violet eyes studied him for a long moment, as though she were seeing him for the first time. Your species is fascinating, she said softly, almost to herself. Perhaps you have something to teach us after all. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a small group of Ithar attendants who escorted the humans to the Grand Palace. As they walked through the sprawling halls of the palace, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sight of the Ithar architecture. The walls were made of translucent organic materials that seemed to pulse with an inner light, casting strange shadows on the floor. It was clear that the Ithar had mastered the art of blending technology with nature in ways that humans could only dream of. Queen Ithar led them into a vast banquet hall, its walls adorned with intricate carvings of ancient Ithar symbols. The room was filled with alien dignitaries, all of whom regarded the humans with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. The tables were laden with exotic foods that Elias had never seen before, the air thick with the scent of spices and strange fruits. As the meal progressed, Elias found himself drawn to the Queen once more. There was something about her, something that tugged at the edges of his understanding. Was it the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the way her presence commanded attention without effort? Or was it something deeper, something that even the Queen herself did not fully understand? As the evening wore on, Ithar leaned toward him, her voice low but rich with curiosity. Tell me, Captain Thompson, about this thing you call Climax. I have heard much about it. But I wonder, what is it, really? Elias met her gaze, his heart skipping a beat. This was a conversation he hadn't expected to have so soon, but now that the topic had been broached, he was intrigued. It's an experience, something deeply emotional, beyond anything else. It's not just physical, it's about connection. A connection between two people where everything else falls away, and you experience something pure, something transcendental. Ithara's eyes flashed with interest. I see. And you believe this is necessary for your kind, a fundamental part of your biology. Elias smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. For humans, it's more than biology. It's about being fully alive. The Queen fell silent, her thoughts seeming to drift far away as she considered his words. The rest of the evening continued in quiet conversation, but for Ithar, something had shifted. She had heard stories of human emotion and experience, but now she was beginning to wonder, could it truly be as powerful as they claimed? As the night drew to a close and Elias retired to his quarters, he couldn't help but feel that he had made an impression on the Ithar Queen. The myths surrounding humanity had always been dismissed by other civilizations as mere exaggerations, but something about Ithara's curiosity suggested that she was ready to see the truth for herself. And as the stars outside the palace window flickered like distant promises, Elias knew that the journey ahead would be one of discovery, both for the Ithar and for himself. He had no idea where it would lead, but one thing was certain: it would change everything. Part 2. The Queen's Curiosity Awakens. Stay tuned as the story continues to unfold. Captain Elias and Queen Ithara's paths are about to cross in ways neither of them expected, as human emotions begin to challenge the very foundation of Ithar society. The Queen's curiosity awakens. The following morning, the Ithar capital city gleamed with the early rays of the twin suns. From the windows of his quarters, Captain Elias Thompson gazed out over the sprawling metropolis below. The buildings of Ithar stretched up into the sky like magnificent sculptures, their smooth, crystalline surfaces reflecting the golden light, casting dazzling patterns across the landscape. The peacefulness of the scene was at odds with the fire that burned inside him. He knew his presence here, on this alien world, would not be just another diplomatic visit. It was the beginning of something far greater. After last night's conversation with Queen Ithar, Elias found himself more intrigued than ever by the mysterious ruler. Her curiosity about the human experience, particularly regarding emotions, and the so-called climax, had been palpable. It was clear that Ithar was beginning to question the rigid, clinical nature of her people's way of life. She had always viewed emotions and physical pleasure as distractions, weaknesses to be avoided, but the way she had responded to his words suggested that she was starting to reconsider. He had only begun to scratch the surface of what lay beneath the Queen's composed exterior. Elias knew that if he was to show Ithar the true depth of human experience, he would have to take great care. The Ithar were not a species known for indulgence or vulnerability, and their queen even less so. As the morning sun climbed higher, there was a soft knock at the door of his quarters. Elias stood from the table where he had been reviewing the Ithar's historical texts, his mind still replaying the conversation from the night before. The door slid open, revealing one of Ithara's attendants, her face serene yet curious. "Captain Thompson," the attendant said, her voice warm yet formal. "Her Majesty requests your presence in the royal gardens." Elias felt a sudden surge of excitement. There was no mistaking the invitation. Ithar wanted to speak with him again. And this time, it wasn't just about diplomacy. There was something more between them now, something unspoken but undeniable. Elias nodded to the attendant and followed her down the winding corridors of the palace, his mind racing. The royal gardens were a marvel in themselves, endless stretches of lush greenery, with plants that seemed to glow in the low light of Ithar's twin moons, filled the space with an otherworldly ambience. Trees with silvery leaves swayed gently in the breeze, their branches adorned with bioluminescent flowers that pulsed with light. Elias was captivated by the beauty, but his attention quickly turned to the woman standing at the center of the garden. Queen Ithar stood by a small fountain, her hands resting lightly on the stone edge. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant gown that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural surroundings. The color of her attire was subtle, a soft shade of blue that complemented the deep violet of her eyes. Her greenish skin shimmered slightly in the sunlight, and her long dark hair cascaded over her shoulders like liquid silk. But it was her expression that caught Elias's attention. It was the same as the night before, curious, thoughtful, and tinged with something deeper, something that Elias had come to recognize as wonder. "Captain," she greeted him, her voice a mix of warmth and formality. "Thank you for joining me." "It's an honor, Your Majesty," Elias replied, bowing his head slightly. He approached her slowly, as though unsure of what to expect. He had learned not to underestimate the Queen's intelligence or composure, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air, a current that seemed to flow between them. "I trust your quarters were comfortable?" she asked, her gaze steady but probing. "Everything is perfect, Your Majesty," Elias answered. "But I must admit, the landscape outside is stunning. Your people have truly mastered the art of blending nature with technology." Ithar gave a small smile, one that seemed rare for her. "Yes, we have always believed that balance is key. To respect nature's beauty while using our advancements to enhance life, not dominate it." Elias nodded, understanding the Queen's philosophy. The Ithar were a species that valued control and precision, but they also respected the natural world in ways that many others didn't. There was wisdom in their approach, but it was also clear that they had sacrificed something along the way, something essential to being fully alive. "Captain," Ithar said suddenly, her voice cutting through his thoughts, "last night you spoke of a human experience, one that transcends biology and physical sensation. I've thought about it long after you left. This climax, as you called it, has intrigued me. I wonder, could it be that what we have long regarded as weakness is actually a source of strength?" Elias looked at her, his heart racing. The Queen's words, so direct and candid, caught him off guard. It was clear that she was grappling with a concept that was entirely foreign to her. The very foundation of Ithar culture, control, logic, efficiency, was being shaken by the idea of human emotion, of vulnerability. This was uncharted territory for both of them. "It's not just about physical pleasure, Your Majesty," Elias said, choosing his words carefully. "It's about connection, true connection between two people. It's about being open, vulnerable, allowing yourself to experience life fully. Many humans view it as a moment of divine transcendence, of total unity." Ithara's violet eyes narrowed slightly as she considered his words. "Total unity," she repeated, as if testing the concept on her own tongue. "But my people, we have long since discarded the need for such things. We have evolved beyond mere physical desires. Why should we seek something so unpredictable?" Elias stepped closer to her, his voice steady. "Because, Your Majesty, it is only through embracing that unpredictability that we truly grow. Emotions aren't something to be feared or suppressed. They're what make us human, what make us real. Without them, we lose touch with what it means to be alive." Ithar looked at him, her gaze unwavering. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence thick with the weight of their exchange. It was as if they both understood the significance of this conversation, that it wasn't just about the human concept of climax, but about the Ithar's very way of life. "Do you think I could ever understand this, Captain?" Ithar asked quietly. "Could I ever allow myself to feel like you do?" Elias smiled gently, sensing that she was closer than she realized. "I think you're already beginning to understand more than you think, Your Majesty. Sometimes the hardest part isn't learning something new. It's allowing yourself to feel it." Ithara's expression softened, a fleeting hint of uncertainty crossing her features. "I have spent my life building walls around my emotions, Captain, to protect myself, to protect my people. But perhaps it's time I let some of those walls fall." The vulnerability in her words struck Elias deeply. He knew that Ithar was not just speaking about physical pleasure. She was speaking about the very core of her existence, the rigid control that had defined her life. And for the first time, he saw the Queen not as a distant, untouchable ruler, but as a woman grappling with the same fears, desires, and uncertainties that all humans faced. "I believe you're stronger than you realize, Your Majesty," Elias said softly. "And sometimes true strength is found in letting go." Ithar nodded slowly, as if the weight of his words was sinking in. The garden seemed to hum around them, the bioluminescent flowers glowing brighter as the conversation took root. The air between them was charged with the promise of something more, something that neither of them had anticipated when this journey began. "We shall see, Captain," Ithar replied, her voice tinged with a quiet determination. "We shall see." As the two of them stood there in the royal garden, surrounded by the beauty of Ithar, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The questions Ithar had begun to ask were just the first steps in a much larger journey, one that would challenge everything she knew about her species, about human nature, and about the way they would coexist. What would happen when the Ithar embraced what they had long denied? What would happen when their queen learned to feel? Elias didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear: whatever lay ahead, it would change the future of both their peoples forever. Part 3. The Awakening of Emotion. Stay tuned for the next chapter as Captain Elias Thompson and Queen Ithar continue their journey into the heart of human emotions, where unexpected discoveries and profound realizations await. The path ahead is uncertain, but both are about to learn that the power of feeling can transform not only individuals but entire civilizations. The awakening of emotion. The days following Captain Elias Thompson's meeting with Queen Ithar were filled with subtle shifts in the air, changes that were both imperceptible and profound. The Ithar Palace, with its towering glass structures and clean, geometric lines, now seemed to echo with a faint hum of curiosity. Queen Ithara's demeanor had begun to shift ever so slightly, a quiet transformation that no one in the palace had anticipated, not even the queen herself. Elias had noticed it in the way she observed him during their brief interactions, in the small flickers of emotion that seemed to escape her composed exterior. There was something more behind her eyes now, a lingering trace of curiosity, of wonder that hadn't been there before. It was as though she had opened a door to a world she had never known existed, and now she was unsure how to close it again. Elias had not been blind to the changes in her. Her once cold gaze now seemed warmer, more thoughtful. At times, she would stare at him with a look that was both probing and reflective, as if she were trying to understand something beyond the words they exchanged. The queen had begun to ask more questions, delving into human emotions, trying to grasp the depths of their experiences. And each time Elias answered, he saw her struggle with the complexity of it all. But it was a struggle that spoke of something deeper, something within her that was awakening, though it still resisted the old ways of thinking. One particular evening, as twilight descended upon Ithar, Elias found himself summoned once again to the queen's private chambers. Ithara's attendants led him through the familiar corridors of the palace, past the grand halls that were filled with silence and a sense of ancient power. The journey was short, but Elias felt his heartbeat quicken with each step. There was something different about this summons. He could sense it, and he knew that Ithar was preparing herself for something, a moment that could change everything. When he entered her chambers, the room was dimly lit by the soft glow of bioluminescent plants that lined the walls. The delicate scent of exotic flowers filled the air, their petals unfurling in the presence of the queen's aura. Ithar stood by a large, circular window, her back to him, gazing out over the shimmering landscape of Ithar. The view was breathtaking, with the twin suns casting their last golden rays over the horizon, illuminating the city below. "You've been on my mind, Captain," Ithar said, her voice low but steady, carrying an unexpected weight. She turned to face him, her violet eyes shimmering in the soft light. There was a change in her posture, a subtle shift. She was no longer the untouchable queen, but a woman who was grappling with something she did not fully understand. Elias approached her, sensing the vulnerability in her voice, though it was carefully masked. "I've noticed, Your Majesty. I can sense it. Something is different." Ithara's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. Her eyes searched his face as if trying to decipher the emotions that had been growing within her. "I've been thinking a great deal about our last conversation, Captain. About emotions, about feeling, and about the human experience. I still don't fully understand it. I don't know if I ever will." Elias nodded, his expression gentle. "Understanding is a journey, Your Majesty. There's no rush. The human experience isn't something that can be fully grasped in one sitting." "I've realized that," Ithar admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I also know this. I can feel something inside me. Something I've never allowed myself to feel before." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts. It's unsettling. The Ithar have long since abandoned our emotions, believing them to be distractions, weaknesses. But now, I'm starting to wonder if it's not emotions that make us weak, but our denial of them. We've closed ourselves off from something essential, and I feel as though I'm only now starting to see the truth. Elias stepped forward, his presence calm and reassuring. "You're beginning to understand, Ithar. That's the first step. Feeling isn't weakness. It's what makes us human. It's what makes us alive. The queen's eyes softened as she regarded him, her posture still regal but somehow more open, more vulnerable. She was no longer the ruler who stood above, aloof from the world, but a woman who was questioning everything she had been taught. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she confessed. "I don't know how to move forward." Elias reached out, gently placing a hand on her arm. "You don't have to do anything, Your Majesty. Sometimes the most powerful thing is to simply be present, to feel, to experience. You don't need to have all the answers right now. Let it come to you." Ithar closed her eyes for a moment, and Elias could feel the tension in her body as she fought with the internal battle that had raged within her for so long. When she opened her eyes again, there was a new depth in them, a flicker of something both uncertain and determined. "I want to feel, Elias. I want to understand. But I fear what it might mean for my people. For Ithar. We've been so focused on logic and control that I wonder if we've lost our way. If I embrace these emotions, these human experiences, how will my people react? Will they accept this new way of thinking? Will they reject me?" Elias looked at her with understanding. He knew the weight of her position, the responsibility that came with being a queen. The Ithar had built their society on stability and order, and any shift in that could be seen as a threat. But he also knew that what she was experiencing was far beyond politics. It was a deep, personal awakening, a journey that she had to take, regardless of the consequences. "Ithar," he said gently, "change is never easy, but sometimes it's necessary. Your people need you to be more than just a ruler. They need you to be a leader who understands the complexities of the human experience. A leader who can embrace vulnerability and emotion, not as weaknesses, but as strengths. What you're feeling right now, it's not just for you. It's for them, too." Ithar looked at him, her expression shifting from doubt to something else, a flicker of resolve. "Perhaps you're right," she said quietly. "Perhaps it's time to stop living in fear of what my people will think and start living for what's true. For what's real." Ithar stepped away from the window, her eyes never leaving Elias. The air between them was thick with unspoken understanding. The queen had taken the first step toward embracing her humanity, and there was no turning back now. She had opened the door to her own heart, and she wasn't about to close it again. "I want to understand what you've spoken of, Captain," Ithar said, her voice steady but filled with newfound resolve. "I want to experience this connection. I want to feel what it means to be truly alive. Show me. Teach me." Elias's heart raced as he met her gaze. For the first time since he had arrived on Ithar, he saw her not as a queen, but as someone who was ready to truly embrace the fullness of what it meant to be alive. And in that moment, he knew that this journey they were on, this exploration of the human experience, was far from over. It had only just begun. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, his voice almost a whisper. Ithara's smile was small, but it was genuine, a glimmer of warmth that had been absent for far too long. "I'm sure, Elias. I'm ready." And in that moment, everything changed. The walls that had separated the Ithar from the rest of the galaxy, walls of logic, control, and emotional repression, began to crumble. The queen who had once dismissed human emotions as weakness was now on the cusp of understanding something deeper, something far beyond the clinical distance she had always kept. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was one that both Elias and Ithar were ready to face together. For the first time in a long while, Ithar felt the stirrings of something she had long thought impossible: hope. Part 4. The Dance of Vulnerability. The next chapter of their journey unfolds as Ithar continues to embrace vulnerability and emotion, and as Elias helps guide her through the complexities of human experience. The two of them must navigate the balance between personal transformation and the weight of their respective responsibilities, all while the galaxy watches. What will become of the Ithar and of their queen as they begin to explore the true power of feeling? Stay tuned.